Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aline McNall, and I'm a Senior Legislative Representative here at IEEE-USA's Washington office. I'll be doing this week's Washington update and look forward to your questions. Feel free to include them in the comments, whichever way you are currently watching the update, and I will answer them likely at the end of the presentation. For those of you who are watching this after it's been broadcast, feel free to send an email should you have any questions or comments at the end of the presentation. Let's get started. So in some space news, IEEE-USA congratulates the members of IEEE India who were involved in the landing on the moon. So India's module successfully landed last week in the first lunar rover to explore the moon's South Pole region. So we certainly applaud the IEEE community over in India who worked diligently on that program and did successfully land on the moon. So signs of water ice near the moon's South Pole have driven scientific interest in this region. And India and the US have recently agreed to strengthen their partnership, in particular in space, but also in many tech sectors. India's budget was actually quite remarkable at $74 million. That's less than we spent on Interstellar here in the United States. So they have landed on the moon in a very tight budget environment, and we certainly applaud them for that as well. And especially compared to NASA Artemis budget as well. Our NASA program is very strong, and of course we do partner with India, and certainly look forward to a continued partnership as we explore the moon. Russia's attempt did unfortunately crash, but we certainly do have IEEE involvement in that program as well, and so we look forward to watching to see what Russia does. And of course this creates a new age of space race between our nations, and IEEE-USA will support our members in all the countries that are involved in the different space races, whether or not they actually are sending equipment to the moon or whether or not it's the satellite program. We certainly have members involved in the space sector in many, many different countries. Some bit of news about commercial space here in the United States. So there's a debate in the House of Representatives over commercial space policy that has been ongoing, but now it's become a little bit more at the forefront of the priorities of the House Science Committee. So some of the issues under debate right now include policy issues within the Office of Space Commerce. So this is within the Department of Commerce. Space-based remote sensing. So IEEE's remote sensing community will be very pleased to know that we're heavily involved in that debate. Space situational awareness, as well as the Space Situational Awareness Institute that's forming at NASA. Launch and reentry policy, as well as registration of space objects. So this is the orbital debris priority that we have for the year, or for the foreseeable future, I should say. But one of our space priorities is, of course, mitigating and addressing orbital debris issues. Commercial space launch and reentry accident investigations, in-space servicing, as well as space nuclear systems. IEEE has a very strong nuclear community, and so we look forward to certainly weighing in there as well. And then interagency space activities. So in the US, we of course have many, many different agencies, from the FCC and FAA to NASA to other space activities within the federal government. And so IEEE is looking to work with the federal government, different agencies within the federal government on our space policy. So an update on defense policy. So NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, is being debated in both the House and the Senate. So each presented their bill before the congressional recess. So we are currently still in our congressional recess, but back in the coming weeks. And so these discussions about defense policy, of course, are ongoing. So some issues in the House that the university community and IEEE are certainly paying attention to include requiring an annual report on incremental and transformational R&D, the research, development, testing, and evaluation kind of entire entity in that entire sector of the defense authorization bill is something that we've focused on for a long time. So one of the newer provisions there includes contract cost sharing, modifications to the procurement of technical assistance cooperative agreements, modification to data policy, as well as reporting on other transactions. There's a pilot program in the Army research section of the bill on technology transition, so that's certainly of interest to us as well. There's an Office of Academic Engagement, which is focused on cyber activities, as well as a disclosure requirement for persons performing DoD research. So this looks at kind of the competition issues between the US and other countries. In the Senate, some provisions that are of interest include there's a provision about reporting on the feasibility and availability or advisability of establishing quantum computing innovation center. There's an annual report requirement being debated on unfunded priorities for research, development, test, and evaluation activities. A pilot program for streamlining technology transitions. So for our small business members and our entrepreneurs, there's a small change in the SBIR and STTR section of the bill in terms of creating a pilot program for streamlining technology transition. So I look forward to working with many of our members in our R&D policy committee, but also the entrepreneur policy committee might be interested in this portion of the bill. And then lastly, in the Senate bill, there's also a debate about university affiliated research centers and one specifically for critical minerals. This is an issue that affects, of course, so many different disciplines of engineering, and one that IEEE is focused on for quite some time. So whether it's our engineers at DOE Ames or it's our DoD focused researchers, IEEE is certainly interested and involved in critical mineral policy, and this provision in particular in the Defense Authorization Bill. So Schedule F is an issue that came up in the previous legislative update, thanks to one of our prominent members, Brendan Godfrey. So I did want to touch base on kind of a follow-up on that particular question that he raised last week. So IEEE does not actually currently have a position on this specific issue. It is one that we debated within our R&D policy committee. But for those of you who are interested in engaging on this issue, it is being introduced in the NDAA debates. And so it's on ongoing discussion in Congress, but basically what it comes down to is President Trump issued an executive order for establishing a new category of federal government service known as Schedule F. And Biden did rescind that executive order, so he canceled it. But the House and the Senate introduced a bill aimed at saving the civil service workers who would perhaps have been eliminated by presidential authority. Because what President Trump was trying to do was to direct agencies to identify employees who might impact public policy to be transferred to this new category, and then they could have more easily been fired than they would have been in the previous category of employment. So like I said, IEEE doesn't actually have a position statement on this particular subject, but given the amount of our membership that is federal employees, I did want to raise it and certainly thank Brendan for the question last week, or 2 weeks ago, I should say. And we look forward to working with Congress to ensure the NDAA process moves forward, but also that our members who are federal employees are supported as much as possible. A quick update on AI. So IEEE is developing a procurement standard that is getting a lot of attention throughout the federal government. So I wanted to raise it here in the Washington update. So this standard for procurement of AI and automated decision systems is currently under development. So some of these issues involve high-risk domains and are focused because of issues like training data biases, model opacity issues, post-deployment draft decisions, complexity, and weak explainability. So these are all different AI issues that are focus of the standard, and IEEE is certainly looking forward to ensuring that the standard development process moves forward, particularly as it affects the critical decision-making process and risk mitigation. And some House Energy news. So the House Energy and Commerce Committee members are opening an investigation into the Maui fires. IEEE certainly wants to support our members in Hawaii and those who do face natural disasters in this country. So we are following the Energy and Commerce Committee investigation as part of our support for our members in these affected areas. So what the committee did is the committee members sent a letter to Hawaiian Electric seeking information regarding the role of the electric infrastructure in these August fires. So some questions have been raised about whether Hawaii Electric sought to modernize their electric grid for wildfire resistance. And so those are some of the questions that congressional offices are raising. So committee members in Congress are looking at whether power lines sparked the dry grass to cause the fires. In Senate energy news, the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee is looking forward to getting up and running after the August recess. And one of their first hearings will actually be on Department of Energy AI activities. So IEEE AI community, as well as our energy community, may wish to watch that hearing. It'll be certainly online in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee website. And so some of the questions that they are raising in preparation for the hearing include how can DOE ensure US competitiveness as it relates to emerging technologies in AI, as well as some permitting issues surrounding electric transmission lines. So those were in debate in the Senate prior to the recess, and those are still being discussed and debated by committee staff. I will end on a less fortunate, less positive note. IEEE is, of course, following our appropriations process very closely. I can certainly answer any questions about that. But in terms of appropriations, one of the main issues that we are looking into is whether the appropriations bills will be finished in time, and it currently does not look like that will be the case. And so we are preparing our members and letting you all know that we are expecting a federal government shutdown. The federal government shutdown would lead to agency staff and, of course, contractors not being able to complete their projects. The previous shutdowns has, of course, had a huge impact on the DC region, but also on other regions throughout the US. The White House has asked Congress to pass a short-term spending bill. So that is something that the president is certainly pushing for. And congressional appropriators are still debating the bills. But for the moment, it does look like we are preparing for a federal government shutdown. And this shutdown would begin October 1st, unless lawmakers either extend the current spending or actually pass the appropriations bills that they need to pass. So IEEE is keeping a very close eye on this issue and the appropriations process in general. Certainly, like I said, happy to answer any questions that any of you have. But in terms of our predictions, we are predicting a federal government shutdown starting in October. I did want to plug an IEEE Innovation Workforce and Research Conference. I mentioned in the previous update. This conference will be September 13th through 15th in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it is aimed at promoting and building innovation, and particularly small business resources in rural America. So it will include stakeholders from industry and government, as well as academia, and will be based on the CHIPS Act, which IEEE, of course, strongly supported, but also include kind of information on other government programs. So I hope you all will register for the conference and look forward to seeing you in Arkansas in September. I will now take questions, comments, or wise remarks from any of our members or any of your viewers. And I do see that we have one question already from Don Harris. Oh, let's see. How invasive grass fueled the wildfire? The utility may not have provided the spark, but not fuel. That is a fair point. So this is an issue that is under investigation, and IEEE was not necessarily in charge of the questions that the committee members asked in Congress as to what they're looking into with respect to Hawaiian Electric. But I did want to mention that they're investigating kind of how these wildfires got started and whether or not there was an electric issue. So just to clarify, IEEE was not the author of the letter sent, but we are following the issue as Congress does investigate whether or not the electric utility was involved in the wildfires. Another question from Robert Burke. What are we seeing in way of results from the CHIPS Act? Are we seeing more chip fab facilities being built in the US? So this bill was passed, of course, recently. And so what we are seeing is that there's a lot of money being discussed. Unfortunately, given the fact that the bill had a lot of the science piece of the bill was authorized but not appropriated, that means that the agencies involved in the CHIPS Act will now have to go through regular appropriations process, and we are seeing that they are not actually getting the funding that was in the CHIPS Act. The difference in the funding levels is pretty significant. And so agencies like the National Science Foundation and NIST are certainly doing what they can. But unfortunately, given the gap in the difference between the appropriations and the authorized funding numbers, there's certainly quite a large gap there, and we are looking at how can we best as IEEE support the agencies in what they're trying to do. But there is certainly a gap in funding, and so one of the things we are trying to do is advocate that the NSF, that NIST, and other agencies, including the Department of Commerce, should receive the CHIPS Act funding that they were authorized. In terms of chip fab facilities, there's certainly a lot of talk of chip fab facilities, and IEEE is tracking that. I think those discussions are underway. It does take quite some time to build a chip fab facility, and so those discussions are certainly ongoing. Implementation of other pieces of the CHIPS Act is another piece of what we do here in government relations. And so some of that CHIPS and Science Act involved a NASA reauthorization. NIST programs and NSF programs were authorized and reauthorized in that bill. And so IEEE is looking at those programs and making sure our members can get the funding that are already in those programs, but also kind of understand that the program changes. And there's a lot there in terms of implementation. So we are very heavily involved in those discussions. Thank you for your questions. I'll wait to see if there are any others. My email is, of course, a.mcnaull, so a.mcnaull at IEEE.org. So for any of you who are watching this after the broadcast has ended, if you would like to send me an email about any of your questions or comments, I'd be certainly happy to answer those then. See, no more questions. I guess we will close today's broadcast, and I do look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks in September when Congress is back in session. So we will have a lot more activity and a lot more bills that we can discuss now that Congress is back from when Congress is back from the recess. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon, everyone.